Hey, welcome everybody to today or tonight or whatever time of day you are in the morning. We always like to say good evening, good morning, or good night, good afternoon, apologies, to today's Security Week webinar. My name is Mike Lennon. I'll be the moderator of today's program. Today's program, Advanced Tips for Securing Large AWS Environments. Happy to be doing this in conjunction with AWS, Orca Security, and Sisense. These are designed to be interactive for this reason. That's why we do them live. Throughout the presentation, we're going to do a couple of poll questions. That'll give us a feel of what environments you guys are using, what tools you're using, and it helps the presenters kind of get a feel of who they're talking to, and it helps us kind of tailor things. So pay attention and submit it. It makes it more fun. We'll share the results with you as we go through. Additionally, another reason we do these interactively is so you can ask questions. In the description of the webinar, you saw Ask Your Toughest Questions. So we have some very technical people, very experienced in AWS, securing AWS environments. So be sure to throw your best stuff at us, and we will get through as many as we can. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our esteemed panelists today, our esteemed speakers. We have Aaron Twizzer. He's a Partner Solutions Architect from Amazon Web Services. Aaron Brown, Senior Cloud Security Engineer at Sisense, and Senior Technical Evangelist at Orca Security. He's going to go, I'm going to pass it over to you, Patrick, for the agenda and formal introductions.
Sure. Thank you. And hi, everybody. Thank you so much for about the next hour of your time. I'd really like to have our two guests introduce themselves. I'll go real quick. I am technical evangelist at Orca Security, so I work both kind of in an outbound fashion in events like this, trying to sort of spread the Orca message, but also kind of in the other direction, working with customers and feeding back their observations and their wish lists into the Orca sort of product development cycle. So it's my pleasure to be here today, and let's maybe hear next from Aaron.
Hi everybody, my name is Aaron. I'm a Partner Solutions Architect working for AWS. Orca Security is one of our partners where we work together on building a joint value proposition for our mutual AWS customers. Prior to joining AWS, I was the co-founder and CTO of Spotinz, which was acquired by NetApp and was also an advanced technology partner of AWS. That's it.
Great. Aaron, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi all. Thanks for joining today. Greetings, as Mike said, from all over the world, right? That's what these webinars are all about, especially in these new times. I'm Aaron Brown. I am the Senior Application and Cloud Security Engineer at Sisense. Prior to moving into working at Sisense, I was working in a completely different world. Well, not so entirely different, but I was working as a full stack engineer, actually building product opposed to looking at securing product. But I was introduced to security as a security champion when I was working at a company a couple companies ago, where I was introduced to my current mentor and boss, Ty Spano, and he kept poking me to come into the security world, and I felt like it was a great move, and it actually has been a wonderful move so far. It keeps me challenged, engaged, and there's definitely never a boring day when you're working in security. But I think when you have some vendors like Orca, at least some of that boredom can come in, but in a good way. Thanks.
Well, that's very kind, Aaron. Thank you, and thank you, Aaron. And we'll get back to you very, very shortly. But let's talk about what we plan to talk about for the hour. First, I'm going to share with you just a little bit about how we've done security, both kind of in the data center and the cloud to date, kind of from a host-based perspective, and then kind of more new from a sort of, let's call it a cloud plane perspective. And then Aaron's going to tell us all about kind of AWS organizations, for that scale out use case of when you kind of get serious in the cloud and you have this need for multi-account governance. He's going to talk to us not only about orgs, but some of the surrounding technologies that make that possible and even automated. And then Aaron's going to speak with us around kind of his and Sisense's journey to scale out, cloud security maturity. In his case, he didn't really have a choice, right? They had this massive kind of appetite for infrastructure, and so I think he's had to learn real quick, and he's going to talk about kind of his journey and how he's done that. And Orca is a small but important piece there. He'll talk about some of how the AWS native tools really help him as well, and then I'll take over from there and just talk to you a little bit more in detail about Orca itself, and if we have time, a short demo at the end as well. And of course, some Q&A, as Mike said, so please do continue to submit your questions. And with that, just before we get started, we're really interested in kind of your current state of, let's call it, security situational awareness. So we're interested in about how much security visibility you have today for your AWS cloud assets, right? And that means VMs, containers, serverless, whatever you use to power your applications. And really, we've got every option there in increments of 20. So we'll take about 30 seconds, and if you could vote, that'd be great, and we'll talk about the results immediately. I feel like we need a little Jeopardy sound as we wait here for the poll results. I think we're just about there, so let's have a look. Okay, so if we're self-evaluating here, what we're talking about for our current level of visibility, we feel like 20% of us. Oh, I see. 15% of us feel like we're very low, about up to 20%. A good quarter of us feel like we're in that 20 to 40%. Almost a third of us feel like we've got up to 60%, which is good, right? I think that number is growing. Probably if we had asked this question a year ago, we wouldn't see that kind of confidence, so that's good. Unfortunately, some of us feel like we have yeah. There's a big range here, I think, is the takeaway. But we're going to talk about today not just security sort of 101, and there's lots still to talk about in that conversation, but as we have this appetite for infrastructure, as demand for our applications and therefore the infrastructure they run on grows, we're going to talk about how we keep up with that. There's conventions, there's process, there's kinds of culture, there's ways of thinking about it, and we're going to try to really talk about all of that.
I do want to say I would love to be able to talk to those that 5% that I feel they have 100% coverage. Sorry to jump in as you're moving on, but I'd love to know how they're doing it.
Yeah, I hope they're already Orca customers, and I hope that's how they're doing it. But absolutely, let's talk about those high confidence folks as well. But I think the takeaway message we hope you take away kind of at the end of this hour is that there are ways to do this, right? And some of them may seem daunting. Some of them are getting easier, right? Even kind of with the native tool stack as well, and more capability. So, there's hope for sure. Okay, so let's talk about how we've done this in the past, even from the kind of data center perspective, and sort of the first thing we'll talk about are those workload agents that we install kind of per asset, per first physical machine, then VM, then cloud instance. They reside in the host. Because they reside in the host, they have that visibility to the operating system, your applications, and the data that reside on that host. And they look for software vulnerabilities, rogue activity, but the problem with agents, though, as I'm sure you'll appreciate, and that we'll talk about probably several times throughout the presentation, is that you must install them and you must maintain them just like any other application, right? And when you don't, these workloads effectively become invisible, right, and orphaned, which I think is kind of the prime challenge or the prime security challenge from that kind of agent strategy. And unsupervised workloads are a little bit like unsupervised children, right? They find ways to get in trouble, and so the next sort of thing on the security menu, if you will, is sort of the network scanner, right? And unlike the agent, they reside on the network, not on a host, and they scan kind of from the outside in, either in a non-authenticated or an authenticated way, so they can kind of peer deeper into your workloads. And they look for, some similar things to agents. They look for improper kind of response from applications, but that's sort of that second category. And they're, deployed per resource, not quite as strongly as an agent is per workload. They're kind of deployed per network, but still kind of, in a per resource kind of strategy. And then in about the last 5 years, we've added this third category of security tool, the CSPM, or the Cloud Security Posture Manager. And they reside, unlike the other two, kind of in the cloud, and they look at, all the data that can be asked of the cloud provider API, right? So, what do my security group configurations look like? What does my networking configuration look like? How permissive are my storage buckets? These are the kinds of tests that these kinds of tools do on a continuous basis. So a very broad set of tests, but they don't get down into the data layer for sure, and even kind of down at the host configuration. They're really kind of about that breadth of test across all that, so all the services across cloud providers, and that's kind of the role of a CSPM. And so, kind of when we sat back, we saw two main problems with really all of these approaches, right? And the first is that agent deployments just don't scale, right? On average, we've seen that less than half of all cloud assets are covered by all the security solutions that an organization leverages, including agents, right? And so it's almost impossible to deploy agents universally, right? Because there's massive, especially in an organization of size, there's massive intra-organizational friction to get them deployed universally, even in organizations that have that dedicated function or sort of team behind that sort of effort. So we consistently see, again, from a top-down organizational perspective, we consistently see very limited deployment in public cloud environments for those reasons, right? And we talk about, the ephemeral nature of resources and, technology that's kind of built to identify things by IP addresses. Those IP addresses become reused and, very kind of short-term resources in the public cloud. And so there are kind of these gaps. And the second problem is that there are, there's simply too many alerts. We found on average you'll discover 10,000 vulnerabilities for every 100 assets, right? And the main reason for that is that these tools kind of work in their own respective silos. They don't understand the overall picture and how cloud security controls relate to one another, and that's really key, right? The agent-based approach kind of sends all the alerts to that, that SOC team. It puts the onus on them to mix in context and understand what's important versus sort of what can wait. And that's kind of really the problem statement that Orca is really built to address. So with that sort of a teaser or introduction, we will hear from Eran, who will walk us through really AWS's approach for scale-out security.
Thank you, Patrick. My name is Eran. As I mentioned, I'm a partner solutions architect working for AWS. Today we're going to talk about managing and governing multi-account AWS environments using AWS organizations. So this is the agenda for today. So first of all, why you should use a multi-account environment, multiple AWS accounts. We're going to do introduction to AWS organization, which is serviced by AWS. And then we're going to go over the different management and governance capabilities of AWS organizations. So when we think about an AWS account, we consider them as compartments for AWS resources. So those are things like S3 buckets, EC2 instances, DynamoDB tables. And when AWS started more than a decade ago, you would create your own account with your username, and then as companies grow and have more business units, they found that they actually need more accounts to separate their workloads between different teams or different groups. And there are actually there are actually a lot of reasons to use multiple AWS accounts. So the first one is that you can actually group your resources for categorization and discovery. So this enables you to very easily find all of the resources for a particular application or workload. You can improve your security posture with a logical boundary. So you can create an AWS account per application or per environment. So you can have AWS account for your dev environment or for your production environment. You can limit the blast radius in case of unauthorized access. So, for example, if one of your accounts was compromised, the only thing that the compromiser will be able to do would be to affect the resources that are currently sitting in that account and that account only. And then finally, it's more easy to manage user access to different environments. So with multiple accounts, what you can do is just say a user has access to these AWS accounts, and you know that all of the resources for the projects that he needs, that user needs to work on, are inside of those accounts. So that makes life easier. Like you can actually do segmentation with your application to your accounts. So let's say you have multiple accounts with all of your different applications. now you actually need a way to centrally manage all of these accounts. And that brings us to AWS organizations, which is our service for providing central governance and management across AWS accounts. So within AWS organizations, we provide you with a couple of key features. The first one is the ability to manage and define your organization accounts, your hierarchy tree. We allow you to centrally control access and permissions. We allow you to audit, monitor, and secure your environments for compliance. You can share resources across accounts, and then you can also centrally manage costs and billing across all of the accounts that you control. Let's start with account strategy with AWS organizations, so how you can actually build your organization with multiple accounts. I'll start with some concepts and terms. So the first one is organization, which is all of the accounts that you currently manage and control in your organization, and each AWS account can belong to a single organization. We have the concept of a management account, here denoted by the blue star, which is the account that you use to create your AWS organization, and you use it as a central management and governance hub where you do all of your management activities for the entire organization. We have this concept called organizational units, or OU, and it allows you to logically group AWS accounts within an organization. I'm going to talk about it in a second. And then we have the concept of a policy, which is document describing set of controls that you can apply to a selected set of accounts. So with AWS accounts, you can first segment your application and workloads into individual AWS accounts for categorization. Then you can group these accounts into OUs, organizational units, to simplify management and to group accounts that are similar together. You can create multiple organizational units within your organization, and you can also nest these organizational units inside other organizational units to start forming a tree hierarchy. This is just one example of way to structure your organization for your business. So you see here the management account, and then you see in the circle multiple OUs, and then under those in the triangles you can actually see the AWS accounts. So when you think about organizing your accounts into organizational units, you want to think about the commonalities across account guardrails. So for example, there's a high likelihood that all of your production accounts may require the same type of security policies applied to them. So that might be one option. You can group those by business units and so on. Once you've built this structure, you can audit and apply security policies to the entire organization, or for specific OUs, or for specific AWS accounts. And again, we're going to see it in a second. Let's talk about the capabilities that are available within AWS organizations. So the first group of capabilities is actually being able to manage and define your organization and accounts. So you can create new AWS accounts programmatically. You can do it through AWS Console or with the CLI or API. And these accounts are automatically get created inside of your organization. We enable you to group accounts into OUs for management. You can tag AWS accounts in your organization, and so now you can attach additional metadata on your account. So who's the account owner, what projects run in that account. And additionally, it allows you to manage service quotas for new accounts using AWS service quotas. So by using a quota request template, a new account in your organization can automatically get quota increases and will have the same quota limit as your existing production accounts. So they're actually ready to go as soon as they've been created. So you don't need to create an account and then wait for the quota increase. You can just create the account again programmatically, and if you have the request template in place, it will also get automatically the quota increases. So this is the first group of capabilities. The second group is control, access, and permission. So you can deploy console and CLI access to accounts for your employees, all from a single location using AWS single sign-on. So you enable AWS single sign-on to have access to your organization, so it can go ahead and perform actions on your behalf, and then you're able to manage your users' permissions centrally. And so now if user A needs, for example, access to this set of accounts, you configure the accounts and the set of permissions, and then AWS single sign-on will deploy all of that on the backend for you. Of course, you can also update permissions and delete them, and then again, AWS Single Sign-On will provision it for you. As you scale to more and more employees and more accounts, this becomes extremely helpful because now you only have to go to one place instead of accessing every single account in order to deploy those permissions for users. So this is a really helpful feature of AWS organizations. We also enable you to define permissions based on membership inside of an organization using the AWS Principal Org ID condition key. So for example, if you have an Amazon S3 bucket that you only want users from your organization to be able to put objects into, now you can write an S3 bucket policy that looks like this. You can see over here that I specify the condition of string equals, and then with the Principal Org ID, with your organization ID, of course. So now only members of my organization are allowed to put resources into my S3 bucket. And this condition key can be used in other places as well across IAM policy. One of our flagship features is the ability to author fine-grained permission guardrails across accounts using service control policies or SCP. So service control policies define the maximum available permissions for IAM entities in an account, but it's important to know that service control policies don't grant permissions to users. So service control policies work in conjunction with the IAM permissions policies attached directly to your users and roles. It provides the outer boundary of anything that can be done in an account. And then the IAM permission says what me as an individual user can do in an account, and then my ability to do work is the intersection of those two.
Aaron,
and then sorry.
Is it fair to call this feature kind of the blast radius for IAM, kind of defining the ceiling of what you can assign?
Exactly. It's defining the outer boundaries of what you can actually do, and you can actually define a allow list and deny list. So what you can do and what you can do. And I have here examples of how you can actually use this feature, this capability.
Awesome.
So you can attach the service control policies to the organization root, or to the OUs, or to individual account. As you see here, I've got the policy attached to the top of my organization, and this is going to affect all of my accounts underneath the organization. You can have policy attached to here to the information security OU, and then it's going to govern everything underneath this OU. And then the policy is specifically attached to account 5 over there that provides additional guardrails. So it's going to take the guardrails of the parent nodes, all of the parent nodes, all the way to the organizational root, and then specifically for that account. So here's an example of how that functions together. So on the left-hand side, I've defined the service control policies on my AWS account that grants access to EC2 and S3. My IAM permissions for me as a user says I have access to EC2 and SQS. And so if I'm sitting in an account that these both apply to, the resulting permission is the intersection of those two policies. So the only thing that I will be allowed to do is actually EC2, because that's the only service that's been defined both in the service control policy and in my IAM specific, in my IAM permissions. So for authoring service control policies, you actually got two different options. As I mentioned, the first one is allow list, where you only allow specific actions. And so we, in this case, have written a policy that says I want to allow EC2 directory service and S3. And so the only services that user in my account, no matter, by the way, if they're signed in with the root credentials or they have an administrator policy, they're only going to be allowed to use EC2 directory service and S3. A good example for allow list policies is, for example, companies in the healthcare vertical that want to ensure that their users aren't launching any service that's not HIPAA compliant in their organization. So they can put in the service list only the HIPAA compliant services, and then they know that no matter what, nobody in their organization can spin up a service which is not HIPAA compliant. The second option for SCP here on the right is the deny list policy, and it blocks specific actions that you don't want users to perform in your organization. In this particular policy, I basically written a deny policy that says that I want to deny the ability for users to remove the account from the organization, as well as the ability to terminate EC2 instances in my organization. So in this case, nobody can just go and take his accounts out of the organization. I'm making sure that all of the accounts are not going anywhere. So those are the two options with SCP.
And these are standard features for IAM, right, Aaron?
Sorry?
The SCP are standard features for IAM, correct? Like for any resource that you want to hook up an SCP to, right?
Absolutely. It works on all of the APIs with all of the conditions and all the resources. That's correct. Yeah.
Thanks.
Let's move to the third group of capabilities that we have in organization, and that's the ability to audit, monitor, and secure environments. Here there are integrations with multiple AWS accounts. So first of all, you can aggregate all of your AWS config data in a central location for compliance and auditing of your accounts. You can centrally create, provision, modify web application firewalls to secure your applications using AWS Firewall Manager. You can accept business agreements for all of the accounts in your organization using AWS Artifact. You can allow organization-wide notification publishing using AWS CloudWatch events, so you can actually create an event bus with the organization ID, and then everyone in the organization can publish events to that bus. You can run automated security checks and prioritize security findings in your organization accounts with AWS Security Hub and Amazon GuardDuty. And finally, we enable you to centrally enable audit logging using AWS CloudTrail, which I want to go into a little bit further. So with AWS CloudTrail, Organization CloudTrail, you can ensure that all of your AWS accounts have audit logging enabled centrally. So this also includes new accounts that join your organization. They will automatically get CloudTrail provisioned on them as soon as they join your organization. A big thing about this is you can prevent your auditing from being modified in an account because it's a centrally managed resource. An end user in the account, no matter, again, what permissions they have, can't go ahead and delete or modify or turn off login in that account, so you can ensure that your audit logs are always comprehensive. And finally, you can have all your audit logs consolidated in one place in a single bucket, single S3 bucket, and you can even query the central bucket using AWS Athena, for example. So now you can write queries against the information that's stored in your audit log bucket. The next place we provide you with functionality is the ability to share resources across accounts in your organization. So now you can centrally define critical resources and make them available to all of the accounts in your organization that are logically isolated. So you can do it first with the Manage Active Directory. So now you can authenticate against your central identity store for applications that are deployed in other accounts. An example of this is being able to do a seamless domain join for EC2 instances that are sitting in any number of accounts in your organization. So that's the first example. You can use the AWS Service Catalog. It allows you to centrally manage product catalogs and provision them centrally and ensure that users in all of the individual accounts in your organization have access to the software that they require. And finally, using a service called Amazon Resource Access Manager, you can share resources such as VPC, transit gateways, subnets, license manager configuration, Route 53 resolver rules, and many other resources. So an example of where you would use Resource Access Manager is ensuring application resources across your accounts are created on your Amazon Virtual Private Cloud, your VPC, by centrally defining your subnets and then sharing those subnets with all of your accounts in your organization, so you can ensure that the same subnet is made available in all of your accounts. And again, in the last 12 months, the Resource Access Manager added a lot of more resources that you can manage and manage centrally and then share with your AWS accounts. So let's recap what we've talked about. So AWS Organization enables you to group your workloads into multiple accounts, so you can have logical separation, categorization, and have security best practices. You can construct your organization to meet your business needs and enable advanced management and governance capabilities across your environment, including things like central access management using AWS Single Sign-On, request quota increases for new accounts using service quotas, define security guardrails using service control policies, set up organization-wide login using CloudTrail, or share resources across the organization using the AWS Resource Access Manager. That's all the content that I have for you today. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Eran. And I'll say that, much and much less over time, but still we do hear from the odd prospect and customer who's, understands the power of the account boundary, but is a little bit hesitant about the proliferation of accounts. I think for this very reason, right? For this kind of co-management, co-governance, but it's very clear that AWS has this problem very well thought out, right? All the way from where kind of you started with organizations in terms of billing, all the way to the security model, and then past that, all the way to we're going to provision this base set of resources in every account, programmatically. It's really comprehensive.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. So next, we have the privilege of speaking with Aaron Brown, who is an Orca customer, but who's going to speak a little bit about kind of his and Sisense's journey to scale out cloud security maturity. Hi, Aaron.
Hey, thanks, Patrick, and thanks, Aharon, for setting this up. So as Patrick said, this is kind of leading into yes, I'm an Orca security customer. However, this is more a story about being better together and how we can use native tools in conjunction with other, third-party tooling that allows us to keep our cloud secure, right? So, I'll say that when I began, my journey at Sisense, my own personal journey as I was the sole security engineer at the time. It was my job to build our security infrastructure, establish, our idea of secure SDLC across, this merging of products as well, and, manage our bug bounty program, manage our penetration testing, address vulnerability management, basically almost everything. But fortunately, we've been hiring and still are, and I get a little bit more breathing room. And I say all that, to introduce the idea of, what it means to scale as a lean security team. We're just a handful of people still, trying to stay on top of, rapid growth, multi-account governance, and then, compliance and audit challenges. So as this small and mighty team, it's important that, we kind of handle these things as one piece, opposed to breaking them out into their own separate categories, even though it is, right now a little bit more easy to digest. And I will say that, while we're discussing our journey to maturity, it's our journey is still being written, right? We still have areas of opportunity for growth. And that's why, we're, still exploring, doing webinars like this, because, it gives us a chance to learn as well. From all of you who are, asking questions. So please keep the questions coming. We can, I'll try to address some of those as I'm speaking, but, it'd be great to cover, most of them in the Q&A session as well, because we can learn a lot from our audience as well. So, staying on top of rapid growth, it's a lot easier to say than it is to do. But there's two main things that I think of that are, kind of combine both a pure technical approach, and then also, things that are solved from process and just communication and working across, your organization and partnering with your R&D team members, your engineering team members, and then also product, right? So knowing your attack surface and reducing your attack surface are two of those things I think of when I think of staying on top of rapid growth. So, first of all, to know your attack surface, you need to know what's deployed. So what is your inventory, right? It's always a challenge to get an inventory list of, absolutely everything that is deployed and modifications to the assets to provide an, additional layer of complexity as well. So there are a lot of different approaches you can take. Before we brought, Orca on board, I was kind of tying together a lot of these different pieces, from, using some AWS config, using CloudWatch, using CloudTrail, all these great things that Aharon was mentioning. I was, deploying Lambdas across multiple accounts to, get all of our, the CRUD options that were being performed on our assets. I was tying, Boto 3 in just to kind of have some small programs and scripts running on my machine. I was using AWS Systems. You can use AWS Systems Manager to help with a lot of this. I think one of the other great tools that you can use here, that's native to AWS is also just patch management. There is a question in the chat, which we can get to, a little bit later as well, but it's asking, how are we managing, vulnerabilities, right? I think one of the biggest things is just, at least at the OS level, is, turning on patch management for your assets. So at least you can say, okay, we know that our OSs are up to date, right? Obviously there's still, all the containers that are living there, all of the packages that you have installed on these systems, you still have to manage that, but at least you can at least start kind of turning on these different levers with patch management. So, not only do you know what is deployed, but you need to have an idea of why it's deployed, right? So the purpose behind it living in your environment. So, this is kind of when it comes into working with your engineering counterparts, is a crucial step in securing these large estates, right? Like, it's never helpful to just be this security team that's sitting off, in some corner or in some tower and kind of, relaying these, draconian ideas of what it means to be secure. It's about, being inclusive and pulling everybody into the conversation as early as possible. That way you know and understand the purpose of why something is living in your environment. So one way of doing this, which is something that we've long done at Sisense, which is, just tag your assets with, their environment, right? So, as a prod, as a stage, as a dev, not only does this allow you to know what its purpose is, but also allows you to later on, lifecycle, which I'll get to when I'm discussing, reducing your attack surface, right? Like it allows you to tear down assets that no longer need to be there. If you are in the, kind of place where you are, you have your AWS account with production assets and your dev, stage, and playground assets, then, life cycling is incredibly important because you need to have assurance that you're tearing down these resources, that they don't impact your production assets. And obviously, don't let them live in the same VPC, right? That kind of ties in with obfuscation. So, insight as well. So know what's happening. So, it's essential to know what's happening on your assets. What's vulnerable there? What kind of, commands are being run on these machines, outside of just logging into the actual machine itself. Orca supplies a nice way to, look at the bash history for any of your deployed instances, which I just recently found out, about a month ago or so. And that's just a really cool feature that, also helps with compliance, which we'll get to as well. So, it's essential to know your attack surface to stay on top of rapid growth. But, in tandem with that, it's also important to reduce your attack surface. So life cycling is something that I'm constantly like banging this gong at Sisense, to work with your engineering teams, establish a process that removes unused resources on a very regular cadence, right? Like maybe that means just, working with your platform team to build a dashboard where people can spin up assets, Cinderella instances, as we used to call them at another place that I worked, that live, 3, 6, 8, 12 hours, whatever it be. And then they get torn down in an automated way. So that way you're reducing, the ability to attack. So reducing your attack surface. You may say, well, it doesn't hold production data, but if you happen to have it, again, living the same VPC as your production resources, then the ability to escape and escalate to a production asset is much greater. Obfuscation, and no, I don't mean security through obscurity. What I mean is following best practices and placing assets, behind, ELBs. This is pretty basic, I think. Most people should be doing this, or at least have an understanding of what this means, but it's definitely worth pointing out here. So, where access is set up via security groups, so allowing you to manage ingress and egress at the instance level, and then, also at the NACL level, so manage it at the network access level as well, to determine from where traffic can come and to where it can go is a great way to just, kind of reduce and manage, what can happen on that machine and who and where it can be accessed. Access control. So, limit ingress to your machines, not just from the perspective of, public traffic coming in, but, from an SSH access level as well, So,
Sure.
It's easy to kind of say, okay, well, let's just have this script that, as we're spinning up these containers and deploying them, let's just define the users that can be in them. Where are you pulling these users from, right? Like, how are you keeping them up to date? That's a huge thing that needs to happen when you're trying to stay on top of, this growth of, different machines and different clusters, and having a centralized place to do this becomes more and more challenging, right? And so that's why, a tool provided by AWS, which is SSM, which is the AWS Systems Manager agent, ties directly into IAM. And you can also tie it in with your SSO. So that way, if you're, whatever you're using to, drive your user access, maybe it's Active Directory somewhere on some machine, and that's where you're pulling in your resources that are mapping to your identity provider. And then that can map to AWS. And so you can actually create these templates that can be invoked by a user as long as they have the access to do so. And all this can happen via the AWS CLI. So once they, get their CLI set up to work with SSO, they can issue these commands via SSM. They can you can give them permission to actually access these resources via direct bash scripts or provide these templates. And again, it's just a great way to limit that attack surface and know who can do what on each machine.
Aaron, I have a question for you on your life cycling strategy. It's such a unique problem. We talk about all these guardrails as we debut infrastructure, and sometimes life cycling includes that loop, right? If we're kind of the pets versus cattle, we don't fix things in production, we kill it and deploy new ones. Regardless of our strategy, I'm curious how you do it. I think I heard you say tags are a big part of that strategy, but having something on the kind of automating running that tears down, workloads and resources that are aging poorly in terms of their life cycle. It's tough to do across an organization.
It is. And, that is still a part of our journey. We've definitely not gotten that down to an exact science yet. It's something that we are continually working and driving towards. We have it in some of our environments, and we're still kind of building it out across the rest of our environments. Fortunately, we do have, different forms of isolation that, that do protect ourselves. But life cycling, I think, just having those tags built in, working with your platform team to, find which methods make sense in terms of tearing it down, working with your engineering team to communicate those changes. Again, a lot of it, in my opinion, the pure technical portion of it is the easy part of it, right? It's easy to, write a script, deploy it, and have this, kube cron job or whatever it is running that will life cycle these, right? That's the easy part. The hard part is working across the organization. And that's going to be, kind of the common factor and denominator across all of these things that I'm recommending. It's a good question. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so, multi-account governance. So, Aaron gave a great overview of kind of how we can, govern and manage these multiple accounts and how you deal with scaling from, 10, 100, 1,000 different machines, like whatever that may mean, it's a logarithmic, kind of curve in terms of like what kind of alerts and things that you're going to have to respond to. Fortunately, it's not exponential, at least it isn't for us. But, a great way to do it, especially as a lean team, is to focus on, distribution of controls and centralizing, have a centralized view, right? So AWS Organizations provides a really nice way to plumb your accounts together. And, it's a good way to manage, at least at a high level, your assets and audit controls via tools like Control Tower, right? So always make sure you're leveraging your native controls within AWS, because they're going to be kind of, oftentimes your best bet, when trying to, ensure compliance and access control. So, with Control Tower, you can define what AWS calls preventative and detective guardrails, which allow you to enforce or detect, alert, and shift away from your defined compliance rules. So, in the past, I've used things like CloudFormation stack sets to deploy Lambdas across various accounts, to get guard duty piping into, fortunately, I work at a data company, and so I can dog food my own product. So, when I'm looking at guard duty, I'm able to, pipe this into a dashboard, and I can get a really nice view of everything that is happening. So, getting that kind of insight from a guard duty network perspective is great. That way I can, kind of respond to anomalies, in real time. So, another great thing is, look at your partners in the marketplace. So, pay attention to AWS partners. Orca being one of them, right? So there are plenty of third-party tools out there, and you can definitely find the one that best fits your use case, right? You may have seen the Orca State of Virtual Appliance report, which kind of lists out some of it's a contentious report that lists out some of the best and worst appliances. Are they updating their own, libraries with their own software that they're pulling into your environment, right? So make sure you are choosing, the right vendor and the right partner. Don't take it lightly. Choose ones that complement your current workflow. Don't let it be one that demands, a specific workflow from you and your team. So centralized view, again, going back to AWS Control Tower allows you to get a great high-level view into your accounts and the state of the rules you've set. Aggregate and correlate data from your environment. Like I said, if you're lucky like me, you can dog food and create your own dashboards and charts. However, there are great open source tools out there like D3 and Charted, which comes from the Medium team, which allows you to plug all this data in. I saw that there's one question in the chat early on about, getting this into a data analytics tool. And, these are ways that you can do so. And then intelligent insight, right? This allows you to have not just data, but insight into what's happening in your environment. So seeing guard duty alerts rolling in is not helpful if you can't tie in the context or knowledge of that asset's purpose, right? So this goes back to understanding your attack surface, right? So it's vulnerability state. By vulnerability state, I mean like what OS version is it on? What vulnerabilities lie there? What installed packages do you have? What can be taken advantage of when you're seeing these guard duty alerts roll in, right? So it's all of these things tied together. You start at this high level of multi-account governance and work your way down to get an understanding of what's happening across your environment. So compliance and audit challenges. So essential compliance pieces can, be hard to answer without manual intervention. So, using AWS native tools and Orca, we now have a better understanding of, our compliance scores and can more easily respond to audit requests for these things. So, pulling out a list of resources, showing their security groups and ingress rules, listing out the bash history is all things, that is now made easier with Orca. There was also a question I read earlier about container vulnerability management. Orca allows for this. You can get, I think Patrick will probably touch on this when he's going through his portion, but Orca gives great insights into, container vulnerability management, as well as everything that's happening on the OS level. So you can get a great readout there. So again, as a lean security team, we are focused on reducing noise because alert fatigue is real and can create burnout real fast if all your team is doing is responding to false positives. Which forces context switching and, drives you down unnecessary rabbit holes. So we continue to focus on automation, but also continue to work with your engineering teams to get an understanding of what's happening in your environment and to reduce that noise. So be deliberate when you're seeking out your solution. You're never going to find a silver bullet that solves all of your needs. And even if you found something that claims to be a silver bullet, to be honest, you probably don't want it. Because there is not one tool, at least in my experience, and the other brains on this chat can chime in if they want. But you want you want a tool and a provider who knows how to do what they're doing well, and they're not focused on the sprawl that is security. And also centralize, right? It's important to aggregate and correlate and pull your data into a centralized place so you can learn, and you can teach your own tools to learn as well. So, centralize is definitely a big part of this journey as well. Is that way you're not going to many and multiple dashboards. Try to pull it into at least one or two places. So our solution wish list was, complete visibility across our environment, risk-based prioritization of alerts. This again goes back to alert fatigue. Open and composable API. As somebody who used to build product, this is one of the main drivers for me into pulling Orca into our environment is a clean and open API that I can build on top of, and also provability for audit. So we say we do it. How can we prove it, and how can we prove it in a scalable way? So our results so far with Orca have been no gaps in coverage. It's been a great single tool, so I don't have to continue as much as I love writing code. It's not always a great use of my time to continue doing that. So, not gluing together many and multiple data sources. Unlike an agent, we have no performance impact. and it's been a huge saving on staff and, multiple software licenses. We've been fortunate that we can, by pulling in one tool into our environment, not only does it provide one centralized view, but it also allows us to move away from, multiple other tools that we would need to learn, integrate, and, get experience on. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
And
Thank
I'll pass
you both.
it over to Patrick.
Yeah. Awesome. Perfect. Thank you both kind of for the journey description and the kind words about Orca. I think we hear that. We hear that it's tough to fill a SOC or a NOC, with people with enough knowledge to understand what an alert really means, right? And so there's more propensity to leverage the tools, to look for tools that do take context into consideration, or as you say, do a bunch of sort of gluing together of data sources. In your line of work, you're especially apt to be able to do that. Maybe not all of us can, right? And so I think that's the sort of constant theme, and I think the reason we try to make Orca kind of so automagic, right, is to do some of that heavy lifting, and maybe then you don't need such a senior sort of skill set kind of responding to the flurry of alerts that we get. Okay. Hey, it's exactly 8 minutes before we have to hang up, so we're going to do this real quick. I doubt we'll get to an Orca demo. Maybe real quick I can show you the dashboard, but my name is Patrick. I'm going to walk you through kind of the reason we built Orca, the design principles behind it. We were going to do a poll. I don't think we quite have time for that. So Orca is a SaaS-delivered security platform purpose-built for the public cloud with really a few key differentiators as we're going to talk about. The first is that the deployment method, the way Orca works is an instant on kind of product, right? And coming from a CSPM, that may not be as revolutionary as it is coming from the host-based vulnerability management world, right? Because every other way of doing this necessarily requires that per asset, or at the very least per network integration. And the Orca approach is very, very different. And even the fidelity of the findings is very, very different, right? Very, 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 very much deeper. So hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about that. Because of the way it's deployed and because it connects to your cloud account, your cloud estate, really, when you're connecting many accounts, it catches everything, right? There's no per asset integration, no ability to miss things that other organizational units are doing kind of without your knowledge, because it does integrate kind of at that account level. Orca sees everything. And it sees it, yes, at that wide layer across all the different security conventions at AWS, but then also down inside your workloads, as Aaron talked about, and Aaron did as well. And because it uses context, it really does reduce those number of security alerts down from, every kind of discrete software vulnerability. We all know that list never ends, right? On any sizable cloud estate, that list of software vulnerabilities never ends. And so Orca takes this approach of, let's group these for something you can actually do something about. Let's present these, and ones that are exposed, right? That's how this sort of second panel of the slide comes into play. That when I have a workload that's exposed, that truly does have a risk from the outside, I'm going to look at what I find at that host layer, whether it be software vulnerabilities, whether it be rogue SSH keys that shouldn't be there, whether it be a cloud credential that a developer embedded in a test script by accident, right? I'm going to look at that, but then I'm going to augment that finding with some observations about what's right above it. Because if that firewall is closed, if that IAM policy around that workload is tight, that's not as important to me about the same vulnerability that is public facing. And that's the kind of classification that Orca really aims to do in an effort to try to reduce that alert fatigue and that inundation of every single thing that's wrong in your environment, because we know as we manage an estate of resources, there's always a lot wrong, because a lot of this is out of our control from a software vulnerability perspective. So Orca utilizes this sort of patent pending technology called side scanning to look deep inside of your workloads and your storage buckets to really dig out those risks, right? And they range from traditional software vulnerabilities to already compromised resources that have malware on them, to poorly aging operating systems that have fallen out of official support, right? And many more conditions. We talked about rogue keys, rogue cloud keys. All these kinds of things are discovered through this process of side scanning, and it happens out of band sort of from the side. So, Orca interacts with the AWS storage layer, if you will, snapshots workloads, investigates those workloads away from their running state. So there's never any sort of competition for resources in your workload. And because we do this at sort of the cloud layer down, every single resource you launch, is visible and is scanned and processed in the very same way from Orca. So no obstruction to workloads, nothing ever missed. And this context, the contextualization is really kind of the second pillar. We talk about side scanning and the lack of agents. That alone is sort of industry unique. But then we take the second pillar of, we do all these kind of CSPM sort of tests like you'd expect, open S3 buckets, for example. But why not go a step further and use all that intelligence to risk the alerts we find at the workload level? And that's really the second pillar of Orca. The context is kind of that secret sauce, right? And so we talk about, yes, we're looking at software vulnerabilities. We're looking at all that information, but we're also looking at the configuration of applications. And, when we say this service is open to the internet, it's not a simple check to a security group. It's that, and then it's a check to, the route tables. Then it's a check down at the workload level to say, is Apache actually configured to serve out of port 80? Or are all these checks redundant because I'm serving on a custom port, right? That's how deep Orca goes in terms of trying to understand not only is a machine internet facing, but is any particular service internet facing. So we use all that data and we make what we call a context map. We mash it up and we say, okay, we find all your cloud assets. We identify their roles, kind of what they're doing, what they should be doing normally. We identify how they're connected, right, through all those networking controls, and Aaron talked about a lot of them as well. And then only then do we say, okay, we found these vulnerabilities. Let's rank them from how exposed they are there fixes to these things, or are these vulnerabilities I can do little about? How old are they? Have they been aging for a long time? Lots of different criteria. It's this sort of mashup of context that becomes so powerful. And so if we look at a very basic example, if we find two vulnerabilities in any particular environment on two separate resources, any other method of management would find these and say these are the same priority, right? After all, they're the very same sort of vulnerability. But Orca takes a very different approach and says, okay, one is very much kind of internet facing. One is tucked back on a network segment that has no internet facing and in fact is only accessible from one other resource. And so why would I rank those the same? It's not that either is not important. It's what should I do first, right? In my never-ending quest for time as a security professional, where should my attention be before it shouldn't? And that's the whole idea of using a healthy dose of context to really risk items. Lots of things that Orca finds. I don't think we have time for this. I'd love to get to a question or two. I know I always look forward to that when we talk webinars. So we have a host of integrations.
Mike said we can spend a few more minutes. Sorry to interrupt. So maybe we have enough time to get through and then also answer some questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Aaron. No, that's perfect. Thank you. So we really try at Orca to build a product that fits into your workflow and not the other way around, right? And so we do have a really wide variety, and we're always working on more. I think PagerDuty is sort of fresh out of the oven, in fact, in terms of no longer coming next. But we really try to build a host of integrations and a really flexible RESTful API. Aaron talked about kind of how he, for the most part, utilizes Orca is sort of in that way, kind of in this programmatic flow, and that certainly we know that's a big part of the use case. And so, with new features often wind up in the API before they wind up in the UI, kind of as an API first initiative. So a lot of focus there to fit into kind of how your security workflows work instead of demanding new ones. I think we're going to skip this, and if we can go a few minutes over, we'll get to some questions.
Great. Thanks, Zach.
Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. Wow, that hour flew by, I have to say.
It sure did.
Let me see here. So we do have a bunch of questions. Don't think we'll be able to get through them all, but sorry that I'm looking up. I'm looking at multiple screens here to keep my eye on everything. One that I thought was a little bit interesting, and it probably kind of touches on kind of that third-party risk management. This person wrote in that they're a vulnerability assessor for their third parties. Is there a way I can assess the security of an AWS environment being employed by our third parties, something that will show their misconfigurations or vulnerabilities? So there might even be a legal aspect to that, but I'll let one of you gentlemen chime in on that one.
Yeah, it sort of depends on without their knowledge. That of course not. But yeah, I mean, I think if there are environments, and Aaron, certainly I want your perspective, but if there are environments that are new to you, we often think about kind of the same use case if you think about it as kind of an M&A one, right? Where I acquire a new environment, I know nothing about it. I think obviously how you evaluate that environment, both broadly CSPM like deeply workload like, has to be fairly automatic because you don't know much about it, right? It has to be something that kind of goes in and from the top down sort of understands all those risks. I think that's key, especially for an environment you don't know much about.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. And, when I was pulling in Orca, as I do other tools, I put it into, this playground account that don't have production resources yet. And I limit the ability, I limit the what it can actually touch, and that way I can get an understanding of, and I realize this isn't directly the question that's being asked, but I get an understanding of what actually the impact of that tool can be. So I can then go back and ask the organization, what are the things you're going to touch? And then also, can you share with me, possible vulnerability report or, something like that. So sometimes you want to just shift it, the onus back to the third party and organization that you're pulling into your environment. To get an understanding of their latest assessment.
Okay, thanks, guys. Okay, we're going to shift over to attack surface here. This question is: you had mentioned inventory for knowing your attack surface. Since cloud infrastructure is so dynamic, does tagging replace a CMDB, configuration management database?
I've not used a configuration manager database. We kind of we try to keep it simple, which is just tagging. I don't know if it replaces it, so I can't speak to that. I just know what has worked for us. I can now look at what a CMDB is and get a better understanding myself. So thank you for that question, because it's going to point me toward learning something new. But tagging for me is native to AWS and is just a really nice, clean way to manage your your assets and inventory.
Yeah,
if anybody else has something to mention there.
I think they work in tandem. Really, I do. I think it's a tough question. I think. Whoops, sorry. Let's go on.
Okay. All right.
We're already 3 minutes over.
Yeah, we'll try and do one more. Okay, this is a good one because you talked a little bit about it, but SDLC isn't always good. How do you incorporate cloud security into scale with your organization's SDLC? So shifting over kind of to the development side again. So I don't know if Patrick, you want to take this one or...
I can start. I think Aaron's probably got a really good perspective too, but I think, I just think it's the famous shift left argument, trying to move security closer to that software development lifecycle that developers are sort of, know in their sleep. We're trying to get security kind of wedged in there so that it's not an obstruction, so that it happens automatically. Insofar as Orca, there are sort of, longer term plans to continue shifting left over time. Today, what we do is we look at machine images. We look at containers that are sitting in registries kind of pre-deployment to judge those for the very same risks that we look at kind of post-deployment as those workloads obtain a life of their own. But yeah, I think that's the biggest answer is just getting security involved into the picture as early as you can. And of course, we find prospects and customers bringing dev test environments to Orca to sort of test the platform first. That's a great idea. But even as you move to production, I think we have to find ways to just get security involved in the process much, much earlier.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, kind of post-deployment as well as, what does it mean to maintain your assets too, right? Like, how do you kind of percolate this exactly? How do you percolate this information up to your engineering teams, right? That way they have a place to go and see what is actually happening on those resources. Because in my mind, the engineers and everyone that I work with, they want to do the right thing, right? But they don't always know how to. So managing, scaling your cloud security and incorporating that into your SDLC is creating a place where they can go to see, what libraries need updated or what, packages that are installed on the OS need updated. Like, what are the things that they can do? Recently at Sisense, we have these quarterly productivity days where we have an entire day that's sliced out, and we kind of work on things that will, either it helps with, reliability, or uptime. But, as October was Cybersecurity Awareness Month, what we did was we did a security-focused productivity day where we went through. I was able to show everything that we felt needed to be changed. I also worked with the engineering team to have, just this spreadsheet of things that we would like to get updated. And we kind of went one by one. We had, about 20 or so people that pulled out what they wanted to work on, and we did that. So you can do it in an automated way where you're showing them exactly what they need to do, and then you can also do it in a really nice way where you're working alongside them to manage this SDLC. I hope that provides some kind of context and insight there.
That did for me. And I think at this point we should probably wrap things up. I hate to not get through all the questions. We had a couple hundreds of people on here, so we did get a lot of questions. Maybe that warrants a part 2 of this webinar or something. But gentlemen, I truly enjoyed it. I learned something, which is always good. A couple quick notes before we depart. You'll see a couple of links. I think, Aaron, you mentioned the state of virtual appliance security. We have a link for that report in the interface and a couple other resource links. Slides will be available. We'll send a post event email to everybody that registered, and this will be available on demand probably within about an hour. So, gentlemen, I'll leave it to you guys for some parting words, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. On behalf of Security Week, thank you very, very much, everybody, and I'll let you guys wrap it up before we call it a day.
Oh, just I want to thank my guests very much for their time. Thank you, Aron and Aaron. I appreciate it. I learned a lot, and that's a great opportunity on a webinar, so thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. I was really happy to be here. Thanks for putting this together. Thanks for hosting it, Mike. Happy to be here for Security Week. And, parting words would be, involve everyone in your organization in security. I think that's how we be successful as security practitioners.
Awesome. Let's do a part 2.
Thanks, guys. Everybody, stay safe and hope to see everyone again soon.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.